There's a lot we can learn about freedom and about slavery and about this story from the African American community. As Jews, we will gather next Friday night and tell the story. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. This is our story, and it teaches us that when we see others who are oppressed, others who are enslaved, others who are strangers, others who are hungry, others who are in need, that their story is our story. I will never forget being in Yad Vashem, standing in a place that I've been to before, but that I experienced in a different way for the first time. As I stood, you can come in, but let's close the door, please. Okay, could you close the door, please? Thanks. As I stood and looked at a picture of a Hasidic man in the Holocaust who had been lynched. And I saw that that story was my story. And Bishop Godbee and the story of African Americans in this country is ours. So there is a tradition of hearing a very long sermon on Shabbat Hagadol. I said to Bishop Godbee, maybe 15 minutes or so, to prepare ourselves for Passover. And we're grateful to you for the Torah that you will teach us, Bishop Godbee. Okay. When they don't clap, that doesn't mean that they're mad or anything. It's like
And we throw candy out.
Well, truly, it's a privilege and an honor for us to be in this place. I'm amongst friends and I'm amongst family. So I'm in my best place when I'm amongst my Bethel family. Makes life worth living. To know that we have been gifted to each other and that we have the privilege of experiencing life together. I want to honor my dear friend and my brother. And he's just that. I could not love him any more than my own blood brother. I would not give any more to my own blood brother than I would to Rabbi Daniel Graber. He is my friend. He is my confidant. He's the one whose feet that I run to when I'm confused and I'm conflicted and I can't find wisdom within company of Christians that I sometimes hang out with. But I run to your rabbi, and he is my teacher. I'm the only bishop that probably has a rabbi. But he's my brother, he's my friend. I had the privilege of sharing life with him, with Rabbi Steve. They have enriched my life and made me a better person and a better leader. I'm just better because they are. I want to begin by saying this, that as I stand before congregations and as I lead people through moments of bereavement, which I'm just coming from now, I often stand before congregations and I impress upon them in countless funerals that I've done and that I've officiated to never say this statement, and hopefully you'll embrace it today. And that is to say that because I've sat in that seat, I know what you feel. Just because we've occupied the same space does not mean that we come away with the same experience. And so I don't want to do this moment an injustice and believe that because we have suffered on some levels the same atrocities, that I know your pain, that I know your experience. That's why it's so vitally important for us to get to know each other and not to assume, but to ask. And so it's in these moments that we are committed as a collective body of people to come together to seek to know each other deeper and to understand each other's experiences on another level. I commend you as a community of people who gather to follow your own faith principles and context, to deviate from that, to give way to another experience. It shows that you are truly people of wisdom because you have committed yourselves to discovering another's experience. That's why I want to talk today about the responsibility and the accountability that comes with freedom. Because I'm sure we can all agree that freedom is not free. I sit here today amongst family and friends and a newfound friend, Yael, who is visiting the States to teach, and she became a part of our community last week just because she stopped in to have an experience that she had never had before. And I said, hey, come with me next week because I'm speaking for my good friend, and I want you to come and be a part of that. And here we are today, many different hues and many different experiences, and we come today collectively to share for the next 2 hours about an experience that I've had. You're supposed to laugh there. I see some of you are familiar with the 2 hour speeches.
Why is the sermon different than any other?
The price that has been paid for us to sit in this moment of reflection is one that has cost our ancestors their dignity, at times their identity, their blood, and yes, even their lives. The horrors and happenings of yesterday have been etched on the DNA, and the trauma of times past still haunts many of us till today. We share histories replete with horrors that have produced heroes and tragedies that have produced the trajectory that has launched and catapulted our people into places that we could have not cerebrally cogitated or contemplated how we would end up where we are. We share a narrative that should have never been ascribed to an individual, let alone to a collective group and a community of people. Our faith should have been our escape, but yet it is at the intersection of faith and humanity that we sometimes have to embrace the evil tyranny of those who are empowered to reign over us. As I stood at Yad Vashem, as Rabbi so appropriately mentioned, we shared an experience that obviously is etched in both of our hearts, because as we approach this moment, it's something that is not just in our hearts, but it's something that was on both of our minds. We stood in front of that picture that was oh too familiar to two men who had walked two separate paths. Two men united by this horrific and haunting image. There's a man hanging from a tree. Unfortunately, this was the experience that united us. And it was in this experience that we committed to each other as we ended our tour that it would be our commitment to each other to bring our communities together so that these atrocities would never be seen again if it were within our grasp and responsibility and the leadership that we had gained amongst our people, that we would leverage it to assure that these atrocities would never happen amongst our communities. Galvanized by a moment that for some we would not embrace easily, but we would evade and we would excuse ourselves from. It was in this tragic moment, beholding this tragic scene, that we received a moment of triumph because it forged and galvanized our relationship in a way that, absent of that moment, I'm not sure that we would have had that commitment. These images and these written accounts of the sacred text of Exodus remind us not to just simply reminisce and rummage through the history of our past, but to make present commitments as Rabbi and I did on that day. And prayerfully, that will be one of the outcomes of this moment, that each of our conscience would be raised and collectively we would come together in covenant to assure that atrocities of our past will never exist in our present. It is through this sacred text that we are reminded of our responsibilities, not just to revisit our past, but our responsibilities to our present. Our responsibilities to not become what we've been through. I could sit here and recite the history of African Americans, and many of us are familiar with the many atrocities that have been leveraged against us as a community. But instead, I'd rather talk about the possibilities of our future. I stand here today in a hallmark week for African American community, as Ketanji Brown Jackson was appointed to the United States Supreme Court after 232 years of denial. We have access to these privileged spaces in our political process and in governing our nation. I stand here today again in another hallmark moment where Tiger Woods re-enters the space of competing for the green jacket. And it would only be appropriate that I, Ronald Godbee, would be standing here to speak at Bethel Seminary. What a great. But we're reminded not to become what we've been through. In the strides and advancements that we've made, I'm reminded of a story that a good friend of mine and I shared together. One of my best friends, Daryl, he and his wife were expecting their first son. And with tiptoe expectancy, I joined with them in that excitement and that exuberance because I knew what it was like to have their first boy. And as I embarked upon this journey with them, I remember the day so vividly when he called me and I could hear the excitement in his voice. Man, we're on the way to the hospital. And as he began to share with me his excitement, my excitement went up, and we did our thing as Black men do, and we had our conversation as Black men had. Makes you want to be a Black man, don't it? Man, we enjoyed our conversation. As they rushed to the hospital, I waited with tiptoe expectancy for his call to tell me that his son Timberland had been born. Time went past and I wasn't bothered by the time that went past because I know what it's like to go through the labor process with my wife, so I knew that time was to be expected. But by the end of the evening, he had not called me, and I became extremely concerned. I thought, no big deal, I'll just go ahead and sleep through the night. I'm sure I'll hear from him in the morning. Morning came and there was no phone call. Now my anxiety is beginning to raise, and so I pick up the phone and I call him, and immediately I can hear a sense of concern and urgency in his voice. He says, man, I need you to pray. I said, man, I'm always praying, but what's going on? He said, when Timberland was coming out, he inhaled when he should have exhaled. He's now on life support, and the reason that is because on his exit, he inhaled when he should have exhaled. What he had been surrounded in for 9 months through the gestation period, what had protected him, what had taken care of him, now got inside of him. What was good on the outside was not good once it got on the inside. When he inhaled on his exit, all of the fluids got inside of him. What's the point and what's the lesson here? When we're exiting, we should exhale. If we ingest the things that we have been developed in, then we'll become poisoned by the things that were supposed to be productive. And so that's our challenge, how to not be developed by the things that we have been through for them to get in us, only for them to threaten us. Because what's beneficial in our developmental process can be extremely detrimental to us if it gets inside of us. As we remember, don't inhale, but exhale. Outside of you, it developed you. All of these experiences and these atrocities were designed with purpose. They have a divine design. Even though they've been uncomfortable, and even though they have been something less than desirable, they have been worthy of developing us to be the people that we are. And so our stories are who we are. They are what we are. That is why we sit here today, the people of character that we are. People who have intestinal fortitude, refusing to quit and refusing to give in to the things that we've been developed by. These are the experiences that give us our commitment to come together and galvanize as a community. There's an old saying that says that the sun that melts the wax is the same sun that hardens the clay. It's the experience that acts as the sun. Either the experience will melt our hearts and it will tenderize our hearts and it will make us compassionate and concerned about our fellow citizens, or it will be the sun that will harden our hearts like the clay and we will become callous and cold. Our experiences teach us, like the sun, that our hearts need to be tempered with mercy and with grace and with peace towards one another. Because even though I don't know what it's like to have your experience, I too have sat in that seat. I don't know what the extent of your pain is, but I too have sat in that seat. And so we share our pain. And we have a decision to make. Will we let that pain be like the sun to melt our hearts? Or will we let it harden our hearts like the clay? There were two brothers, and one of them was an extremely accomplished attorney, and he ascended to the apex of his career. And on the opposite end of the spectrum was his brother, who was a miscreant. He had had a number of run-ins with the law, and this last run-in with the law ended up giving him a life sentence. This high-powered professional attorney just couldn't rationalize and reason how we could grow up in the same house and have the same experiences. And I end up on one end of the spectrum and my brother end up on the other end of the spectrum. So he made up in his mind, I'm going to clear my calendar and I'm going to go and have a conversation with my brother, because I've got to find out, how did I end up an attorney and how did he end up a hardened criminal? As he cleared his calendar and made his way to visit his brother, he comes into the prison and he sits before his brother and he says, listen, man, I had to see you. I had to know. How did you end up on the other side of the law? I spend my life committed to serving and assuring that there are people who will not end up where you end up. But yet my own brother is on the other side of the law. He says, well, since you finally asked, I'll tell you. It's about our father. He was an alcoholic and he was abusive. He says, but since you've come all this way and you've had so many questions for me, let me ask you a question, dear brother. Accomplished attorney. Let me ask you a question. How did you end up an accomplished attorney? He said, because our dad was an alcoholic and our dad was abusive. Both having the same experiences, but each coming to different conclusions. One, the sun melted his heart, and the other, the sun made his heart hard like clay. The sacred text of Exodus is not our excuse, but it is our reason. It is our reason to have hearts that are conditioned to care for humanity. We all have reasons, and some of us feel like we have rights to feel the way we feel and exercise the viewpoints that we exercise. But the truth of the matter is, we have a responsibility to do just as we're doing today, to sit and to hear. and to experience and to learn. To give ourselves to hearing others' experiences and others' perspective, so that at the end of these moments, we understand that it is our faithfulness, not only to God, but God's faithfulness to us that has brought us through the atrocities that we've been brought through. It is in bondage that we have found the bonds of brotherhood, and in slavery that we have found the sorority and the security of sisterhood. I want to say something very peculiar, something that you may not agree with. But we all sit here today because we've been trusted with trouble. We've been trusted not to become what we've been through. We've been trusted to allow the things that we have been developed in to shape our conscience and to make us clear that we have a responsibility to each other. We cannot sit in our ivory towers and feel as if because we have ascended, maturated through certain experiences and made it to certain points that we have no responsibility for our fellow brothers and sisters. We have been trusted with trouble because it is the test that was the fight, and it was the test that gave us our fight. And it's in the test that we really got our testimony, and the testimony is that we did not give in to the temptation to become what we were developed in. I have so many reasons to hate people who look like you, and you probably have so many reasons to hate people who look like me. We have things replete within our narratives that have shaped our ideas and our understandings, but it's in giving ourselves to moments like this that our hearts can be softened. And we don't lump everyone into one category, but we allow each other to experience each other's scenarios because we have come to discover each other. 12.5 million Africans were loaded on ships and were part of the Atlantic slave trade. 2 to 3 million Jews enslaved in Egypt, millions murdered in the Holocaust. I could go on, and I could run the list, and I could run a gamut of things that we have been injured by, but I choose not to participate in the oppressed Olympics because each of us in each of our communities has gold medals in those Olympics. I just want to challenge you today. Don't be like Daryl's son. Don't inhale on your exit. Days when the disparities are overwhelming. And as I'm called to lead a community through the racism that is launched and leveraged against us daily, when I have to deal with the institutional bias and the systemic prejudice that I have been victimized by, I could very easily give in to that and let it get in me and poison me. But I choose not to inhale on my exit. But I choose to allow those things that I've been through to develop me and to make me sensitive to the plight of all humanity. Someone paid the price for us to be here today. And we have a responsibility to respond to the price that has been paid. Maybe it was your Moses and maybe it was my Martin, but our liberators lost their lives for us to sit in this moment. For Bethel, I sense that this moment is not just ceremony and symbolism, but you are serious about your commitment to unifying our communities. And for that, I'm grateful. I'll leave you with this, and prayerfully, I've impacted you and said something that will be etched in your heart, that will cause your conscience to be raised. And as we approach one of the greatest moments in our faith, each of us through our faith context, pray that you will remember this last experience that I had. When I was in college, there was a very powerful woman from Asia who came to our college to speak about her work with women's rights, because she was an advocate for women's rights in Asia. And as she began to speak, so eloquently and profoundly reciting the experiences that she had had, as she got deeper into her lecture, she began to express what she would do with her power as she entered into a space that she was entering into. And I heard the vitriol that began to raise up in her voice. And at the end of her lecture, she asked for questions, and I raised my hand and she acknowledged me, and I asked her this question. And it's the question that I ask you. What will you do when you're in the position of power? How will the one who has been oppressed not become the oppressor? And so daily I live with that question reigning in my heart. And I live challenging myself as I ascend to places of power and as I stand on the backs of my forefathers and my ancestors who gave their lives for me to stand in this moment. When I gain power, I always have to challenge myself and wonder, what will I do with it? Will I repeat the failures of my forefathers, or will I build upon the gains that have been given and gifted to me? And will I do something that is beyond the ceremony of the words that I say? Or will I give myself daily to the sacrificial space of serving people who don't look like me, people who are not from the same socioeconomic strata as me, people who don't have what I have? Will I reach beyond the borders? And will I give myself to uniting humanity? We cannot rewrite yesterday, but we hold the pen of tomorrow. And each of you today, I challenge you to write a different story. I challenge you to take who you are and utilize what you have to not put people back in a place where they've been, but that we commit ourselves together as a community to coming together to help someone else experience what freedom feels like. We are freed so that we might free others. We are liberated so that we might liberate. We are blessed so that we might bless. We are saved so that we might save. And we are helped so that we may help. In this moment of memorial, and then this monumental, momentous occasion, let us take away from this moment not just what our ancestors endured, but from their experience, what can we etch in the hearts of humanity? And what can we be to all other people? Shabbat Shalom.